Assalamu alaikum. So I want to share with you this verse from Surah Ar-Ra'd, chapter 13, verse 17. I think this verse tells us a lot about the spiritual journey, about our own personal development, and how we interact with information, especially the information that comes from the Quran. So this verse says, أَنزَلَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً فَسَالَتْ أَوْدِيَةٌ بِقَدَرِهَا. It says that He has sent down from the sky water, فَسَالَتْ أَوْدِيَةٌ بِقَدَرِهَا. So the valleys flow according to their measure. So let's pause there and think about that for a second. So He sends down from the sky water. Perhaps water can be a metaphor for the life-giving information that we get through the Quran. فَسَالَتْ أَوْدِيَةٌ بِقَدَرِهَا. So valleys flow according to their measure. So the first thing I want to point out here is that the word awdiyatun that we translate as valleys is indefinite here. Awdiyatun. He didn't say al-awdiya, the valleys flow according to their measure. He said awdiyatun, valleys in a general sense without making them specific. And the reason I think that's such a beautiful way of putting that is because if you take this as a metaphor, if you take the valleys as a metaphor for how people accept the water or the life-giving substance of the Quran, it's beautiful that it's phrased in an indefinite way, because it's not talking about any specific people or any specific capacity that they might have or any specific background that they come from. It's completely indefinite. So it applies to anyone who interacts with the life-giving substance of the water or the knowledge of the Quran. فَسَالَتْ أَوْدِيَةٌ بِقَدَرِهَا. Valleys flow according to their qadar, according to their measure. So, meaning, or at least one reflection that I get from it personally, is that valleys flow according to their measure. So how we interact with the knowledge of the Quran is according to our own capacity. So just like if you have a valley and you have the downpour of the rain and the water flows in it, the water is going to flow within the course of that valley. So the depth of it, the size of it, the rocks or whatever is contained in it, it's going to flow. Like some people say, water takes the shape of the vessel that it's in. If you put water in anything, a cup, a bottle, whatever it might be, it's going to take the shape of whatever vessel that's in. So here, this is a beautiful metaphor for how we interact with knowledge. فَسَالَتْ أَوْدِيَةٌ بِقَدَرِهَا. All kinds of valleys in an indefinite way, all kinds of people in an indefinite way, regardless of their background or who they are. The water, the life-giving substance that comes from the Quran is going to flow within them according to their qadar, according to their own measure, right? So the knowledge that you interact with in the Quran is going to be according to your capacity, your understanding, your perspective, your background knowledge. Everything that you are, you're going to bring to the study of the Quran. So even if you're, let's say, a biologist, or if you love studying physics, or if you know Arabic, whatever background knowledge you have, that's what you're going to bring to the Quran. That's your valley. So if you love studying, for example, the natural world, just as an example, when you go to the Quran, that's how you're going to interact with the knowledge of the Quran. You're going to understand it from the perspective of the natural world. When it talks about trees, when it talks about all these different types of signs, ayat, that are in the natural world, you're going to see it in a certain way. But a person coming from, say, a psychology background might look at the Quran and see all of the things that talk about the anfus, the souls, or the psyches, or the minds, or however you want to translate that word, the nafs. Inna nafsa la ammaratun bisu. That the nafs, the human psyche or soul, perpetually commands one to do evil. So you're going to come to that if you have that background, and you're going to see a different set of meanings in the Quran than another person might see. So we bring our background to the Quran, we bring who we are to the Quran, and the knowledge of the Quran is going to flow according to the makeup and the measure of the valley of each one of us. And that doesn't mean that we can't expand that, because just like water, when it flows through something, and if it does it for a long period of time, it's going to erode that, and it's going to make other pathways. So in the same way, the interaction with the knowledge of the Quran goes both ways. So you're gonna the knowledge of the Quran is gonna flow within you in a particular way according to your measure, but also it's gonna create other channels within you too. So it's gonna open up your mind. It's gonna make you see things differently, and it's gonna make you research things, because you're gonna see something and that might not be from your background, but you want to understand it more. And in doing so, that's gonna open up another pathway. So I think that's such a beautiful metaphor. فَسَالَتْ أَوْدِيَةٌ بِقَدَرِهَا, that the valleys flow according to their measure. And then the verse continues, فَاحْتَمَلَ السَّيْلُ زَبَدًا رَابِيًا. So the flow, the sail, the flowing water carries with it scum or foam that continuously grows on top of it. Now, I think there's a couple really interesting perspectives to that, at least from my viewpoint. So, number one, I think this says something about how we interact with the knowledge, meaning the knowledge itself is pure, right? But when it flows through our valley, there are other things within that valley, other debris, other plants, or whatever it might be, that is going to pick up and it's going to develop this kind of foam or scum on the top based on what it picks up going through the valley. But the water or the knowledge itself is pure. In the same way, valleys as a metaphor for human beings, when the knowledge flows through us, there's going to be some things, some impurities that it picks up along the way. So I think that's a really good metaphor to think about. Number one, recognizing those things and trying to the best that that we can, purifying ourselves of those things, but also realizing that when we interact with knowledge, we affect that knowledge in a certain way, in the sense that it brings up certain impurities. So when we speak about that knowledge, or when we act on that knowledge, or when we teach that knowledge, we should always maintain that humility of knowing that once it interacts with our valley, that it doesn't have that same level of purity. So I shouldn't feel like, as a seeker of truth, or as a seeker of knowledge, or even someone who's sharing knowledge, that what I know or what I think or my perspective is the absolute truth. Because in flowing through the valley, it's going to pick up certain things that are zabadan rabian, that are just foam or scum, that are not actually part of the original life-giving substance, but that are going to develop or grow when it's flowing through that valley. And the other thing I want to mention about that is Zabad and Rabian is some of what that water picks up flowing through that valley are dead things, like plants and stuff that have died and release certain oils. And so you can look up, if you study what causes scum and foam, I'm sorry, on the top of like rivers, you'll find a lot of discussion like this, like the debris that it picks up. So that's another interesting part of this metaphor, in the sense that when this life-giving substance, this water, flows through the valley, it's going to pick up some dead things too. And in the same way, the knowledge that flows in our valleys as human beings is going to bring up some things from us that are dead, some ideas, some practices, some perspectives that are dead, in the sense that they're not life-giving, right? We don't need them, but we're holding on to them, and they're going to kind of float to the top, and we're going to notice them. And that's part of our spiritual development too, is to try to remove those things. And notice he says zabadan rabian, not just the foam, but it's growing. So the more the knowledge flows through the valley, those dead things are going to continue to grow and to rise up. And then he says, وَمِمَّا يُوقِدُونَ عَلَيْهِ فِي النَّارِ ابْتِغَاءَ حِلْيَةٍ أَوْ مَتَاعٍ زَبَدٌ مِثْلُ. And also, what they kindle upon it in the fire, so what they use fire to, ibtigha'a hilyatin, seeking to make like ornaments, aw mata'in, or some supplies, zabadun mithlu. Also, there's scum and foam that arises from that. So he's given us two different metaphors to think about the idea of how you have a substance that's valuable, like in the one case, water, which is life-giving, and in this case, where you have hilya al mata', where you have some ornament that people want, or some supplies that they can use. In both cases, what's going to develop from that is something that's not usable, or that's not valuable. It's going to come out naturally in the process. Then he says, كَذَلِكَ يَضْرِبُ اللَّهُ الْحَقَّ وَالْبَاطِلِ. Likewise does Allah put forward al-haq and al-batil, truth and falsehood. So that's why I started off saying this is a metaphor for truth and falsehood, or the search for truth and falsehood in our spiritual development. And then he says, فَأَمَّا الزَّبَدُ فَيَذْهَبُ جُفَاءً. And then as for the foam or the scum, then eventually it will leave jufa, and it will be just cast away. وَأَمَّا مَا يَنْفَعُ النَّاسَ فَيَمْكُثُ فِي الْأَرْضِ. But what benefits people will remain in the earth. كَذَلِكَ يَضْرِبُ اللَّهُ الْأَمْثَالِ. Likewise does Allah set forward parables. So that's why I said this is a parable, perhaps, for our search for haqq and batil, our search for truth and falsehood, and how ultimately the scum that rises to the top, that's made up of all these debris and dead things, it will go away. It's not actually valuable. مَا يَنْفَعُ النَّاسِ. What benefits the people is what will remain. يَمْكُثُ فِي الْأَرْضِ. It will remain in the earth. So this, inshallah, can give us some insight into our journey and to realize that bringing up all these debris and all these impurities that come up or become connected to our minds and our perspectives and our practices and our teaching and all those different things, when we interact with the knowledge of the Quran, it's a part of the natural process. So it's upon us then to be self-aware of these things as they come up and to try to help them go, يَذْهَبُ جُفَاءً, and help them just be gotten rid of, and the beneficial part of the knowledge remains. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.